Hello and welcome, connoisseurs of fine common cardboard, to today's live stream. My name's Ryan. I go by Pauper on the internets, and I'm so pleased to have you all here today for this live stream on Orzhov Nightmare. Want to give you guys a brief heads up on kind of what's been going on in my life and why there's been a bit of a brief delay in the production. But before we get started here, please let me know in the chat below if you can hear me coming through loud and clear. We're operating on completely there's a bunch of new stuff, bunch of new stuff on my end in terms of the equipment, and we've basically rebuilt everything kind of on my end. So let me know if the audio is coming through clean and clear. But I want to start off by letting you guys a little bit in on kind of the some of the things that have been happening in my life. I think it was last video, it was the AKAWALLI. I mentioned there was some like health problems I was experiencing and a variety of other things. But most recently, the thing that's kind of had me away for the last 2 weeks and away from the computer, this is my first time using my home computer in 2 weeks. And that is because I moved out of my home. So I've moved in with my partner, my wonderful partner Meadow, and so I am in a new building, which looks like this. No, this is obviously the pig face is not what we've got going on, but yeah, I'm in a new room. I had to move all my stuff. It's taken me about 2 weeks to move, and we're not done yet. There's still a bunch of stuff everywhere. So it turns out uprooting your life, 22 years living in this same spot, basically, it's pretty significant. So anyways, that's kind of where the delay is, but I've been busy. Still, we've got content coming. The new year's got a bunch of exciting stuff. We're going to be experimenting with new thumbnail designs, new technology, new stuff in cPDH. Going to keep this fine stuff coming right your way. So with that, today I am joined by my friends David and Eli. How you guys doing today?
Pretty good.
I'm doing great.
Excellent. Well, it's great to have you.
Excited to be here.
Yeah. So one of the things that we've been working on a lot lately, at first, David, you and I were working a bunch on stuff with Orzhov. We had some new cards printed, and you and I were going back and forth on kind of different builds with that. And then as I introduced that out into the Discord server, Ravamati, Eli, you were participating in that and very engaged in it and offering a lot of insights. You guys started to play some games back and forth, experimenting with these new cards we've gotten. And I thought it only fitting to bring both of you guys in here to help kind of grok this really interesting and exciting series of cards that we've gotten and the way they influence some traditional archetypes and make new archetypes in Pauper, in 60 card Pauper. And I know both of you guys play a fair bit of Pauper. I know Ankylosaur, you've been doing, or Ankylosaur, pardon me, you've been doing a lot of stuff both in paper and online, right? Is that correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Awesome.
I have a regular group at my LGS, and I've been grinding a lot on Moto lately. So
that's awesome. Fantastic. And Ravamati, you've also got some experience with Pauper. You've been playing a bit more Pauper lately as well, too?
I've been doing some paper with some of my friends and stuff.
Excellent. Well, that was why I brought you guys in here today. This was definitely one that needed more than my brain to grok it, and that's what we've got here to talk about today. So for those of you in chat, we're going to launch right into this little presentation we have here, and then we're going to take a look at some of the deck lists that we've come up with. Keep in mind, this is not prescriptive. These are lists that we're going to continue to test, but they're things that we would have some confidence in to try out, to give a shot at your local game store and give you some sense of some of the cards that you can play with in this archetype of basically this core Skyfisher Glint Hawk type stuff. So let's get started here with our first slide here. Let's see if it works, if my computer will allow me this one simple thing. No, never easy. No, it's not wanting me to do that. I wonder what's the... Oh, hold on. One sec. Always smooth, folks. Always smooth. Stay classy out there. There we go. Here we go. Okay, cool. So, traditionally, in this archetype, we have the Glint Hawk, the core Skyfisher, and the Thraben Inspector have been a pair for a long time. They basically, the concept being that we're going to run out certain... Oh, Got a little sound there going on. We're basically going to run out certain permanents like Experimental Synthesizer, Lembus, and Ichor Wellspring. And then we're going to pick them up and we're going to reuse them with things like Glint Hawk, Core Skyfisher, and there's some other options we have there as well. And this was evolved from times past where you had like Boros Monarch, where you would use like Alchemist Vial and Prophetic Prism. And of course, Prophetic Prism is maybe one of the most embarrassing bans of all time, but it is banned in Pauper. And that was one of the mainstays of that deck, because we had all these ways to draw cards. There was a period of time, brief moment in the sun, when we, of course, had Arkham's Astrolabe. That is also banned, maybe for better reasons. I'm sure you guys would agree than Prophetic Prism. Prophetic Prism, significantly less good than Arkham's Astrolabe. And basically, we're looping these things to generate a lot of card advantage. One of the big gains was the Experimental Synthesizers. So this is pretty well-known stuff, not anything super new. Barbed Batterfist, of course, giving us a way to create an endless army of 2/2s while also giving a +1 power to our birds so that they can punch in for a little more damage and help us close the game out. That's kind of a newer innovation that came from New Phyrexia. And then we got cards like Candy Trail, which see a little bit of play too, Golden Egg. And then, of course, for red, we're getting Lightning Bolt and Galvanic Blast along with the Barbed Batterfist, giving us closing power, efficient removal, and all sorts of stuff there. So this is kind of the traditional builds. Now, some of the builds also go into black. They'll splash a little bit of black, and that's for cards like Omen of the Dead, Chainer's Edict for improving the matchup against decks that require edicts or where the bolts or the blasts aren't going to be as effective. Reaping the Graves and Omen of the Dead both being amazing tools for grinding in matchups where they just kill all your creatures. Reaping the Graves can just get all of them right back. Omen of the Dead can loop with the Core Skyfisher to pick up all of your Core Skyfishers, and then I suppose you could you just have it in hand so that you can pick it up when the next one dies. So these kind of help ensure our engine keeps going. This is like the traditional Boros/Mardu builds that we've seen in the past. But recently, we got a card called Hopeless Nightmare. And I think pretty soon after that, I started to think about this in 60 card. I know Rave. Do you play Rave? You play a little bit of Loyal Subordinate, don't you? In cPDH.
Not usually.
That's not one that you've touched. Was it you and Kylosaur that have done some with?
I've tested a couple. We did a stream for Halloweenish where I played Loyal Subordinate. Yeah,
I recall this now. Yeah, exactly. So this is a card that people are excited about for mono black, suicide black decks in cPDH. It's also probably good in 60 card suicide black decks, but I was most excited about this because we can loop it with Core Skyfisher. And that's really where the juice on this card comes from. And this is kind of when I reached out to you and Kylosaur, and we started to kind of workshop around this and see what we could build. And you'd done some testing with it, and we've got some ideas about some cards that people can play in different builds. One of the other builds that came out with the Hopeless Nightmare, and I actually casted a tournament over on Maldhound's stream, was in these Ephemerate Goliath Paladin Vampire Sovereign decks. And these decks are basically looking to survive the early game with edicts and removal, and basically they want to land this initiative or some drain, and then they want to set up, ephemerating for value. There's no like infinite loops here, no, ephemerating over and over and over again. It's literally just to bounce things. They can also pick up a Core Skyfisher and basically flicker that to pick up the Hopeless Nightmare and do it that way. So in some ways, the Ephemerate counts as like copies like 5 through 8 of Core Skyfisher, because it's allowing you to pick up those cards. And this player, I'm going to missay their name, but Christorf, I think it is. Do you guys know if that's you've probably seen them in chat. Rave, you were talking with them a little bit, but Christorf placed, I believe, top 4 in Maldhound's rather enormous Pauper tournament with a deck like this, with Hopeless Nightmare. But shortly after that, not to be outdone, we got Tithing Blade. Tithing Blade alongside Hopeless Nightmare. This really was where it got kicked into high gear. And before Tithing Blade came out, the Hopeless Nightmare was not really, I think, like very high on people's radar. But Tithing Blade hit, and this became the focus. And this is when we all started to talk about it on Discord. And there's a lot of other reasons to be playing black. And this is kind of why we're here today. Cards like Cast Down are just a catch-all answer to anything from a Goliath Paladin to a Noid Altasaur to a Boarding Party to something like a Talarian Terror or a Cryptic Serpent or a Gurmag Angler. It's killing everything for 2 mana. It's just one of the staple cards in the format. And Snuff Out for the same reason, especially with cards like Talarian Terror. We also get Deadly Dispute. So not only can we be looping our permanents for value, but eventually, or early on, if we want to just draw more cards, we can sacrifice those permanents as well. Somebody goes to kill our creature, we can draw 2 cards instead. Deadly Dispute is a staple of the format. Other cards in black that are rather interesting to think about too are cards like Okiba Reckoner Raid, which is really like a cheap draining permanent that turns into an attacker. We have cards like Pestilence, which have traditionally been part of like Orzhov decks in the past. And Kylosaur, you've talked a little bit in the past about the Orzhov 60 card decks you've played with Pestilence. You've been playing a little bit with Pestilence, haven't you?
Absolutely, yeah. It's well positioned in my meta at the moment. Just lots of little creature decks that you get to stick a Pestilence, especially with the Guardian of the Guild Pact, which is also in the build that I'm running. And you can just clean up the board
over and over and over again. Yeah.
Over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Yep.
Pestilence is one of my favorite cards in Magic, I would say. And it definitely shines there as a closer, as a sweeper. It does a lot of work. Drown in Sorrow being another one of those cards. And ironically, Drown in Sorrow is actually quite good against and in these decks. You're cleaning up all of the Glint Hawks, you're cleaning up all the course, not the core Skyfishers, but the Thraben Inspectors. You're going to clean up all the Rebels. You're going to clean up a lot of different stuff with Drown in Sorrow, as well as things in like Mono Red, where you just kill absolutely everything they have. Now that we don't have Monastery Swiftspear, there would be no way to save it. So you really just like have a bunch of 2-butts and they all die. So these are all cards that we like in black that are causing us to say, we've been in Boros in the past with a light splash of black, and the light splash of black was good. But with Hopeless Nightmare and Tithing Blade, maybe we want to be taking a closer look at just taking black and having that be our secondary color. Now, when we were diving in, we did get lost in the sauce, and we started thinking about some other stuff. Namely, when you're playing the enchantments and some of these non-artifact things, Glint Hawk becomes a little bit harder to play. You can still play it, it's just tough, right? Because a lot of the permanents that are 1-drops aren't as good, right? But you can do stuff with cat food. Turn 1 Cauldron Familiar into turn 2 Core Skyfisher, or turn 1 Okiba Reckoner Raid. And we tested this a little bit. We found that the Cauldron Familiar may be a little bit anemic. There may be some usefulness, though, still to this in continually fogging damage while draining outside of combat against Talarian Terrors. And of course, it just has a really efficient curve. But this is something that you can do. Candy Trail is another thing that goes into this, along with Blood Fountain. Blood Fountain being a really useful way to pick up multiple things. We did find that this deck kind of always had something to do, but that's really not all that new. All of these decks, Orzhov, Mardu, Boros, they always have cards to play because their curve is very, very low. So now with that out of the way, we're going to shift over here and we're going to talk a little bit about some of the decks that we built. So talk a little bit about this, Eli. You and I talked a little bit about the Orzhov stuff and where we landed with this list here.
Yeah, this was kind of a more aggressive slant than most of the deck lists that we were seeing. Trying to use Hopeless Nightmare to strip away cards in the hand and get some damage in, and then just kind of close out with a couple of evasive beaters. Tended to struggle a little bit against just larger value threats, though.
Yeah, you did a little bit of testing with this. We could talk a little bit about this card. We actually kind of skipped over why I think this card is good, but I think time will kind of tell. Some of the testing, you found that it wasn't as good as you wanted it to be, or maybe there were other permanents that were more premium to be bouncing with your creatures. But one of the reasons I wanted to highlight this card and why I think it's good is that it's like disruption and pressure at the same time. And that's like a really common, the kind of ingredients we want for really, for any kind of magic. The ability to disrupt somebody and apply pressure at the same time is really quite good. And some of the turns with Hopeless Nightmare, where you go Hopeless Nightmare on 1, Core Skyfisher, pick it up, turn 3, Nightmare, Skyfisher, pick it up again, and then swing for 2. You've already dealt your opponent like they're at like 14 or something, and they've lost 3 cards. Some decks, like against Burn, that's basically like life gain, right? And other decks, they just really don't want to have their cards discarded. But when you played it, what kind of stuff did you learn about the Nightmare?
It's really bad against any aggro strategy, because turn 3 they've already played all the cards in their hand that matter.
Yeah.
And so it's basically 1 mana drain for 2. You're not racing them. You're just kind of going down on cards, really.
Yeah, for sure. So this one here is going to be a bit more polarizing in its matchups. It's going to be perhaps better in a control matchup where you can continually apply attrition to their hand. This will act like removal in some cases because they're going to have to discard creatures potentially. And the ability to loop this definitely seems useful in certain contexts. However, it does sort of lean us away from Glint because we can't do anything with Hopeless Nightmare and Glint. Cards like Aviary Mechanic start to look a little bit better there, but Aviary Mechanic, and this is something, David, you and I talked about this quite a bit. Maybe you talk a little bit about this tension between Glint, Aviary Mechanic, Core Skyfisher, and the sort of permanence we want to play on 1.
Yeah. So Aviary Mechanic is it is a way to pick up some of the things like Nightmare. Some of the it picks up a Thraben Inspector as well. The trouble that I was running into with Aviary Mechanic is that it's not an evasive threat like the Glint or the Core Skyfisher. And sometimes in the format as it is now, where it's slanted a little bit more aggressive, the red decks are very popular. The Tolarian Terror decks can dump, 15 power on turn 3 or 4. It's just so many serpents out of nowhere. Having a 2/2 is sometimes just a 2/2 on the ground, a bear. Not always the most impactful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a really interesting point, and they're not necessarily like mutually exclusive. Like it's not that we like some of the exploration we did had like 4 Aviary Mechanics. I think we even looked at like Core Celebrant, or Stockpiling Celebrant, which is which is another card that I didn't really mention in there because we kind of all came to the conclusion that the extra mana here decreased our action economy significantly enough that we didn't ultimately want it in the deck. It's a slightly better body. It's, it can attack through Augur of Bolus and Philology Archaeologist, and, it does have some potential there, and it does scry too. So it's kind of like Candy Trail attached to it whenever you do the pulling back to hand, which is useful, but ultimately we never ended up going down that route. But the trick has been trying to find like what the balance of the deck is when you have Glint that require artifacts, and you have Core Skyfishers, which are ambivalent, but you also have Hopeless Nightmare, which is a turn 1 play. So there may be times where there's tension between the Hopeless Nightmare and the Glint where you just wish this was some sort of artifact, right? And that's something we've been kind of endlessly navigating around as we've played with this list. And as we played with the list, there were a couple of things that became clear, and one of them was, let's see if we can pull up this right here and go to this, was that there was a lot of reason for us to still be in red. And this was kind of where I thought, oh, okay. So the Orzhov thing definitely has something going for it, right? You've got cleaner mana, you get to play Snuff Out, you get cast down in larger quantities, you're still getting the Deadly Dispute, but it's just a little bit more efficient mana. But in red, when we go into this and we actually do a full split, 30-30-30, really, it's super, super close, we get kind of like the best of all the worlds, but maybe with a clunkier mana base. And when we started talking about this and going into synth and we cut the trolls, then we realized that the gates come in here as well. Basilisk Gate, of course, being just like such a powerhouse in the Squadron Hawk decks, the blue-white Squadron Hawk decks. So we landed on this one here, and if you guys want to talk a little bit about what we came up with here and provide some folks context on what we've got.
Yeah, having the extra reach with Galvanic Blast and Lightning Bolt, as well as early removal for the decks that you need to take those things out with, combined with Experimental Synthesizer, which, as you mentioned, is a fantastic source of card advantage. Play it, get an extra card off of it, pick it up with Glint Hawk, get another card, replay it. There's a third card that you've gotten, or a fourth card. I've lost track.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's so good. Such a very powerful card. Also an artifact we have a Krark Clan Shaman in the deck, which fantastic against the red decks, which again I mentioned are sort of everywhere at the moment.
Yep.
Lots of goblins getting played. Yeah, so lots of good reasons. There's a makeshift munitions in there as well, which can bring down little creatures or close out the game at the end of it.
Yeah.
And speaking of closing out the game, you mentioned Basilisk Gate. Basilisk Gate plus our 4 of Glint Hawk, 4 of course Skyfisher. Just some sweet evasive threats to get in, bump them, even 3 or 4 extra damage a turn off of Basilisk Gate closes the game very fast.
It does, yeah. And generally speaking, like when you start to use Basilisk Gate, you're in this position where you have a couple of evasive flyers, or just even one, right? Maybe if you've been grinding really hard and you've been able to stick a creature and hold it, and you've been killing their stuff, looping Tithing Blades, casting down, killing their creatures. They don't really have anything left, and now you're just like pushing the damage through. In fact, I was watching a game between you guys where Ravamati, you almost put a Basilisk Gate on the Krark Clan Shaman. You tried.
Yeah.
There was a bolt.
I tried.
There was a bolt there ready for it. But
Yeah.
those sorts of like repeat, ability to wipe the board over and over again while keeping the thing that does it. But basically, Basilisk Gate is kind of our closing power here alongside the Galvanic Blasts and the bolts. Now, the story of how we got here is really interesting because we went back and forth on so many different builds. And one place that you want to think about when you're building in these colors is that when you're an experimental synthesizer, all of the cycler creatures, the Oliphants, the Troll of Khazad-dûm, even stuff like the Initiative, like Goliath Paladin, Thorn of the Black Rose, these cards become very unattractive because hitting them off of experimental synthesizer is so much worse than hitting a land. If you hit a land and you've played it correctly where you get to actually play the land, right? You don't play land and then play synth. You play synth, wait for it, see if there's a land on top, and then play that. But there's certain like flow charts of ideas that come through here, right? An experimental synthesizer just wants to be in a deck where everything is like 2 mana or less, ideally 1. And this is like a big departure from any of these like Orzhov decks that we've seen with the Ephemerates. Now, I think you guys sent me some lists here. I'm going to pull this up. This is going to briefly disrupt your videos for a moment here, but I'm going to take us over and look at some of the other lists that we've got, which was the Skyfisher. We had a whole bunch of different decks here, actually. We've got a bunch from the 5.0 deck dumps, I believe. And I'm going to open all of these here. There we go. And then we've got Mardu Synthesizer. No, Nightmare. There we go. As well. Bingo. Okay. Go back to here. And there we go. And we're going to go and grab, let's see, this Mox field here and go over to here. Let's see if that works. There we go. Okay, Cool. So here's some of the decks that we also did when we were researching this. And maybe since you guys are a bit more familiar with these lists, we can talk about what we've got going on here. This one here by Addicted. Was this you, Rave Amati, that identified this one?
I think all of the ones from the 5.0 were.
Yep. That makes sense. So this one here is on Glint Hawk, Thraben Inspector, Core Skyfisher. This is on a Thorn and a Goliath. This one did place third. Looks like it went 5-2, so that's definitely a good record. Although one of the things that we see here is that it's pretty low on like reliable Glint Hawk hits, right? We only have 8 things that we can bounce with the Glint Hawk, which while the Glint Hawk is good, one of my concerns this whole time has been, how do we make sure that the Glint Hawk is reliable? And I would anticipate you really need like 12 artifacts that aren't lands, because yes, we can bounce lands with Glint Hawk, but that's not why we're not here to put ourselves behind on mana. So, it's like a thing that we do more for the fact that we have Deadly Dispute than like the way to think about artifact lands in this Orzhov is that it's not for Glint Hawk, it's for Deadly Dispute. Eventually in the late game, you've got all this mana, you just sack it to Deadly Dispute, you get probably a land somewhere in there, you get a treasure, that kind of stuff. So like this list here is interesting, but it looks like Glint Hawk's a little inconsistent. And then we've got these really heavy top end curve here. No Ephemerate here, Prismatic Strands to pair with the Thorn and the Goliath Paladin. Anything else you guys are noticing here? Got another 20 lands kind of.
Yeah. I think this deck is it's not looking to aggressively play the Glint Hawks. It's more using them as a value piece.
Yeah.
To in the mid game, picking up a Lembas and then immediately replaying it because you picked it up for 1 mana. Getting to reuse the Tithing Blades. But sometimes it will just be in your hand. And I think this deck has decided that's okay.
Yes.
We've got a bunch of removal. We've got card advantage in the Monarch. We can grab the initiative and protect it with Prismatic Strands, as you identified. And then later, once we've established, that sort of control element, we've got our cards flowing, and we can start playing out the Glint Hawks. That once we finally hit the Lembas, we've hit the Tithing Blades. Yeah. It's not looking to like beat down with them so much as it is using them sort of as like an ephemerate that's attached to a 2/2.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Anything you wanted to say about this one, Eli?
Just kind of the number of artifacts in these decks and how a lot of the Orzhov decks, we really only have like 8. You have your 4 Lambas and your 4 Tithing Blade. And the thing that we are really wanting is like that third really good artifact that we can bounce, and that's exactly what the Mardu is helping us with.
That's a really good point. Synth. Yeah, because the synth is that 8th artifact, or that 12th artifact, right?
Yeah, because it makes like Glint Hawk actually really consistent and gives you so much grind power.
Yeah, synth is to the surprise of nobody a pretty disgusting magic card, and particularly so when you're reusing with Glint Hawk. That really is the stone cold nuts. And that's one of the things you get when you go into Mardu is you do get, like you said, better access to artifacts because of the synth. And so you can kind of see like the Mardu synth decks are really like Glint Hawk decks in a way. Whereas like a Nightmare build is going to be more of a Skyfisher build that happens to have Glint Hawk as a threat. And then we have this deck where Glint Hawk is actually, it is a threat, but like you said, it's like a slow ephemerate, or it's like a value ephemerate that's got a body, right? Because you could play ephemerate in this, and we have talked about that quite a bit, how ephemerate fits into some of these like bigger Orzhov decks, namely wanting to flicker Goliath Paladin. Really, that's the best one. The other one would be the Vampire Sovereign. So let's take a look at this one too. This one. Actually, and Kylosaur, did you sent me that one that was by, what was it? Let me see if I can find the list. Okay, this is another one here that you sent me, Rave. Where was that one by, what is his name? He had a name that was backwards.
Oh yeah. Let me see if I can pull that up.
Yeah, I'm pulling. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay. Cool. I got it.
Oh great.
There we go. Cool. Pulling that back up there. Okay. So we have this Mardu synth deck here, which looks like it's really heavy into the Krark Clan Shaman, so it has the Ichor Wellsprings. This is another way that you could potentially, like the way that we chose to do it in white-black, that you can get more artifacts into the deck. But of course, Ichor Wellspring, comparatively is half as efficient as the synth, right? Because synth is just 1 mana, right? It is color restrictive, so that is an issue sometimes, but similar construction. We have the Galvanic Blast, the Lightning Bolts. They've chosen to basically stick with Bolt and Blast as their removal, where we've gone into Cast Down. And we even toyed around with Snuff Out a little bit, but similar to the Gate thing, when we had Snuff Out in the deck, we thought, okay, Lembas, we've got ways to gain life to offset that, but playing the duels came at the competition of playing the gates, and the gates is really where we want to be. You can see this person's also decided gates. They've got the 4 Citadel gate. This is a lot of gates. This is 12 gates. Maybe a bit more than we would play. I think we're currently on 10. Is that right?
9 tapped gates and then 2 basilisk gates.
Okay. Yeah. That makes sense.
11.
Yep. And you can see also something that we've done here as well is they've got Ancient Den and Great Furnace as their artifact lands. There's really no reason to have Vault of Whispers as an artifact land, because Great Furnace is turning on Galvanic Blast, and of course Ancient Den is kind of there in a pinch for our Hawk to pick up in a pinch. Obviously not what we want to be doing, but and then a lot of these decks too playing kind of like a one of Makeshift Munitions, a one of Omen of the Dead. One of the things we did is we have a one of the Barbed Batterfist, which is one of the costs of going into black, is that you don't get to play like a full play set of that. Although when I have played Boros, I found that the Barbed Batterfist was something I only want. It was really good, but I only wanted like 2 of them in the deck at most, because multiple copies start to feel kind of dumb. Like why did I allocate this extra slot to this card when my deck draws Giga cards anyways, and I'm going to draw the card, Yeah. So we've got this here. And then we have this Mardu synth list. This is yours, Rave. And one of the things that you want to... Actually, this has got some really cool stuff in it here. Tell me a little bit about a couple of cards. We've got Ardent Elementalist and Reaping the Graves, which really stick out here. And I'm actually going to disable tags for the moment, just so we can see this. And it's... Yeah. I always find in 60 card, I want like the traditional categories. And then when I'm in cPDH, I want to make my own categories.
Yeah.
But yeah, you've got Reaping the Graves, you've got Ephemerate, you've got Ardent Elementalist, you've got a Dawnbringer Cleric.
Yeah. This was kind of my second take at Mardu before we all took a look at it together. And this is kind of what I settled on. I wasn't quite sure on the Omen of the Dead versus Reaping the Graves thing, and having Ardent Elementalists to actually really loop with either Ephemerate or Reaping the Graves seemed pretty good, but I think it's much.
Interesting. It's interesting. I don't hate it. These Reaping the Graves with Ardent Elementalist is as obnoxious as Omen of the Dead, if not more, because you can actually pick up a lot of creatures. It's mostly uncounterable, whereas Omen of the Dead is not. You can just counter
just
it.
Hitting any of these off Experimental Synthesizer kind of sucks, though.
Yeah, that does seem like a limitation here, is that Reaping the Graves and Ardent Elementalists are ones that you don't want to hit. Ephemerate also, because Ephemerate, you really want that to be like a reactive spell. They go to kill your creature, you Ephemerate it, you save it, as opposed to proactively doing it. They kill the creature, then you lose the Ephemerate and the creature, which is particularly brutal. But it does show you kind of the breadth of different cards you can play here. Same thing, 20 lands. We have the same Omen makeshift hits here as well. You've also chosen to go more into cast downs because it is just a hard no.
Yeah. I didn't actually like test this at all. This was more just like an idea, and
Thought experiment.
yeah. And there's like 4 or 5 one-ofs in the deck, maybe 6, which would probably be better served as a 4 of something. I don't know.
Yeah. You also
cast down is just like a solid answer, whereas I find lightning bolt and blast often, like, there's a lot of things that they don't hit.
Yeah. It depends on what you want to be better against, what you want to lose to. You know, like in one way, it seems like we could talk about the terror a little bit. Like terror, that's where the cast down really shines, as well as the tithing blade. But a well-timed counterspell on tithing blade, as you guys saw, makes that not a loop. Yeah. So
Yeah.
And so cast down can really come in and fill that role. And just kill them, right? Because eventually you got to run out of hard counters. You got shit like Force Spike and, you know, Spell Pierce and stuff like that. And these cards just, you know, eventually they're going to help you take those things out. So we also had this one here. We're going to turn this was your approach to, Eli, to your approach to Orzhov Nightmare with Candy Trails. This actually looks really similar. Troll.
Yeah.
Yep. So this is actually the real main difference is that this has Troll instead of the gates. It has Troll, Bojuka Bog, and Orzhov Basilica instead of the gates.
A lot of these decks are very similar, plus or minus like 10 cards or something.
Yeah.
So this one's just a little more aggressively slanted. Is this one with Okiba Reckoner Raid?
No, this one isn't. We actually haven't gotten to that one. Okay. This one does have Hopeless Nightmare in it, though. You did choose to play the Nightmare in this one with 4 ways to pick it up. And this also seems super relevant. Although we did find, like, when I was testing these decks with the gates in it, the gates are online a little bit earlier. They're also just lands that you just play out that don't like cost you mana to cycle, although Troll itself is an amazing threat. So it just depends on like how you want your end of game scenario to look like. Is it killing people with the Troll or is it killing people with gates? And I think what we all kind of decided was that the gates, as you said, David, uncounterable.
Yeah, sure.
Yep.
Yeah, they just do the thing.
One note on this deck is it felt like it was trying to lean forwards, but was very much on its heels at the same time.
Interesting.
Like, most of the deck was like controlling, and then you have Hopeless Nightmare and some of these really, like, is this one on the 8 inspectors?
This one's on 4 inspectors, but we should at some point bookmark that to talk about the novice inspector as well, which is coming down the line as well.
Because it felt like it was trying to be a little bit aggressive, but then very controlly at the same time, and it just didn't really work too well.
So let's talk about the new card. For those of you who have been living under a rock, you may not know that Thraben Inspector has a friend, a partner in crime, so to speak, and one does wonder whether this will also enter the Vintage Cube. Because currently Thraben Inspector is in Vintage Cube. I like to watch a lot of Vintage Cube, and Thraben Inspector is a card that people pick like surprisingly high. It just works really well in the sort of like Thalia sort of decks and whatnot. But where do you guys think, starting with you, Ankylosaur, this novice inspector fits into Pauper in general? Because it seems like having full 8 copies of a card that people play in so many different decks, like, would just be great.
Yeah. I'm not sure which decks will want the full 8. I could see there are white weenie decks that have a surprisingly good win rate. In the banning video, when they were talking about banning Monastery Swiftspear, Gavin pulled aside white weenie and was like, "This deck is actually putting up numbers." I could definitely see something like that. So you get the core Skyfishers in that deck as well.
Yeah.
If the trouble is always that, like, as good as a 1 mana 1/2 that makes you a clue to draw cards or have artifact synergies is, it is at the end of the day still just a 1/2. It's not as aggressive as it could be. It's you're not going to close out the game with a Thraben Inspector.
Yeah, this really wants
But,
like a Rally the Peasants or a Guardian's Pledge.
Absolutely, and maybe Guardian's Pledge is a card that the White Weenie decks play. It's like one of the better overruns in the format. I could see a Boros deck that cares about the artifact as well. Going back to Rally the Peasants, that used to be a very big card in the format.
Interesting. Should we let's assemble something here. So let's just do Boros. We can kind of like, as you talk about it, let's just build it. So Novice Inspector. Yeah, I always want to say Apprentice. Thraben Inspector. And actually, another home for the Novice Inspector is in Soul Sisters. That's a deck that really, really wants the card advantage and the cheap bodies. I have that it's kind of a beginner deck that I have in my Pauper battle box. Because it's just monocolored, it's pretty resilient to just like, because it's gaining a ton of life, and then you win with like Squadron Hawks with like random shitters, and then like Guardian's Pledge, right? It's all about the Guardian's Pledge and the Battle Screech, right? But I've been using, oh boy, what's it called again? It's the Connive creature, is
Rafine's
Informant. Yeah. Yeah,
Card is very, very good.
Yeah, I've been really impressed with this card, and actually, like, thinking about the battle screech, prismatic strands, traditional Boros bully that was iconically started by Propaganda. This is like really just amazing in that deck, because instead of playing, like, for example, a Faithless Looting, you just play a creature. And on turn
play
2,
a 3/2 for 2.
3/2 for 2 that drew you a card, and put a card that wants to be in the graveyard in the graveyard. I mean, it's strong. So maybe we put in the 4. Like, they usually were on 3 Rally the Peasants.
Usually 2. 2 is the number that I'm seeing.
Okay.
Yeah. Let me post this over in our Discord chat. This is just a random list that put up a decent result in a challenge not too long ago. This is just maybe a starting point. Kerblinksy is
very talented.
A Pauper grinder. Yeah, very, very good deck builder.
Okay, so pulling up this one here. Okay, so we have the Lunarch Veteran, we have the Thraben Inspector, Rafine's Informant, Squadron Hawk, followed up by, this is really sort of like, this looks like, Boros Bully is what I played, or Boros Rally is what I've called it in the past, but people know it as Boros Bully. This is the deck that I took to 3rd at Rags to Riches. Some number of years ago, but it was kind of like my primary deck. I basically was allergic to anything that couldn't beat Tron, and this is definitely one of them. This deck has a miserable Tron matchup. At least Flicker Tron it did. It was abysmal. But your traditional like Rally the Peasants, Battle Screech, Ramosian Rally, Prismatic Strands, Faithless Looting. This is sweet. So like in this case here, like some of the things that look like, 2 Rally. The Ramosian Rally is interesting. That's kind of like hard prepping for like Drown or Suffocating Fumes. It's very interesting.
I think Suffocating Fumes is one of them. With the prevalence of the red decks in the format, a lot of the red decks are main decking End the Festivities to deal with all the goblins. So this is sort of it can be a bit of a finisher, but it's also like hedging against getting your party ended.
So this person doesn't want to become collateral to the main deck and the festivities. That certainly makes sense. Yeah. It has Lunarch Veteran, which is a little bit different too.
Yeah, I was just going to say, the Ramosian Rally does feel like a flex slot if we were looking for places to add some Novice Inspectors.
Yeah, let's do that. So
you definitely see that.
Where did we? Okay, so Novice Inspector, Rafine's Informant. The Lunarch Veteran also doesn't strike me as like a super crucial card. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I mean, the life gain is good. It's a 1-drop. It turns into a flyer that gives you more life. And you can pitch it with Faithless Looting and with Rafine's Informant.
Yeah. It's not the most exciting card in the list,
Yeah.
but I have found that it's a really good role player.
Yeah.
Against the aggro decks, they do kind of want to spend a bolt on it.
Yep.
Yep. And then you can get it back. It gains a surprising amount of life, especially with Battle Screech. You can ditch a Battle Screech with Rafine's Informant, gain some life off the Lunarch Veteran. It itself becomes a flyer, which is good with Rally the Peasants.
Oh, yeah.
There's like a surprising amount of things that the Lunarch Veteran does.
Yeah, you can go turn 1 Lunarch Veteran into turn 2 Rafine's Informant, pitching a Battle Screech, and then turn 3 run out any number of cards to flashback the Battle Screech, and then turn 4 you're presenting lethal with a Rally the Peasants. That's a pretty savage series of events. So let's see what that would look like then. So so we would also want the 4 Squadron Hawks. Like that, and then we're gonna have probably 4 Prismatic Strands. The strands are also like one of the reasons. Did I miss that? Prismatic, of course, Prismatic. One of the reasons that Prismatic Strands is such a house in this deck is it's also a one-sided board wipe. Because when people attack you and you have this in hand, you just like cast it. If it gets countered, you flash it back, and then you set up your blocks and you just like wrath their board. And usually it's even better than that, right? Usually they don't have a counter spell for it. So that's certainly where that plays a good role here. So these actually kind of want to be alongside the Lunarch Veteran, don't they? Because they're like more cheap creatures.
Any number of Journey to Nowheres. Yeah,
we could do to nowhere. To nowhere. 3 Journey to Nowheres. We probably want 4 bolts here. Of course, we need to do the lightning bolts. Yep. 1, 2, 3, 4. Oh, there we go. And then the flex. Let's see. We also have Faithless Looting, and then the. Yeah, Faithless Looting. Oops. Let's bring this over here. I wonder if this deck doesn't want the full 4 of that either. And this is, I guess, where the Lunarch Veterans come in. Right? So maybe 3 Lunarch Veterans, like that. And then that leaves us with 20 lands. Main difference is like Ramosian Rally, no Electrickery. I don't like Electrickery doesn't strike me as a card that we absolutely need. It seems like if you're planning on playing against fairies a lot, that this would be great. But like, it's a sideboard card in the main deck. Ramosian Rally kind of the same way, right?
Yeah. And this might have just been a meta call for the challenge that they were playing in.
Yeah. Yep. And another thing that we oftentimes saw in decks like this was Seeker of the Way, which I'm a pretty big fan of, although Lunarch Veteran is kind of accomplishing a similar role because we're getting life from it, and it's cheaper, and you can discard it. So I can see why this may have taken the slot there. But this is 40 cards, you know? And there's no reason why this also couldn't become a Gates deck, right? Like, I'm noticing this is not a Gates deck here.
Yeah. So I have seen some versions that do run the Gate package. And that's, if you're running Gates, sometimes they'll throw in some Guardians of the Guild pack. They'll throw in some Sacred Cats as well.
Yep.
Because Sacred Cat you can't race it with the Gates.
And you can discard it. And it comes back.
And you can discard it.
Yeah.
It comes back. It does a surprising amount. It does, just being a little 1/1 cat.
It does make me wonder, about Squadron Hawk these days a little bit, Like Squadron Hawk is a good card. It's kind of nice on turn 2 to be able to like pitch your battle screeches into the graveyard by like overstocking your hand, or pitching a prismatic strands in particular is like really good. And also just like a strong form of card advantage. But if we're getting Novice Inspector, there's a part of me that wonders whether the time of the Hawk is maybe maybe that wants to be something different, like the full 4 of these and then some cats, right? Like it's super low and mean to the super low to the ground.
It's certainly possible.
Evasive threats have always been like the staple of this deck, and so like it makes Rally the Peasants a little bit worse to be doing stuff like that. But you could totally see this with like 2 Basilisk Gate, let's see, it's always, there we go, 2 Basilisk Gate, and then what are the white ones called? Citadel?
Citadel Gate, yep.
Yeah, and I don't necessarily know that you want 4 and 4, but like 8 tap lands is like perfectly reasonable. This is actually like mostly a mono white deck. How interesting is that? Like you could almost see like, what if you just... Yeah. So there is Marshalling Cry as well, instead of Rally, which is mono white.
Yeah, the benefit to Rally is that there are some turns where you can just like get to 6 mana, play it, flash it back, and suddenly you've like 20'd somebody with your battle screen.
Yeah, that was always like the power of it, was be able to play it and flash it back and just win on the spot. Yeah. So maybe the maybe we just like minimize the splash of red by
do that.
Like Faithless Looting is pretty good here. We have 3. Faithless Looting could go, and we could go up to 4 journeys. Something like this. So maybe it's like 4 bolts. We cut the Faithless, and then we play. Like we need a couple more lands here. So let's do like 2, like 1 Boros Garrison, and I mean, we could just like placeholders here. Be like 7 planes, and 2. See, why aren't these? Oh, disable tags. There we go. And then 2 mountain, like that. Now, oftentimes this would have like Ash Barrens or something in there as well, but I'm kind of curious about how this looks in a mono white shell. So there's part of me that wants to say like, what if we just like cut Bolt, cut Faithless Looting, like this, cut Rally, just for like this mono white beatdown kind of a thing. And then we go 4 Guardian's Pledge, like that. That's 55 cards. So we could go up a Lunarch Veteran. We have the same synergies with the discarding. We just don't have the Faithless Looting anymore. So like, what would be the other cards that might go along with something like this? Like Ramosian Rally could be.
There's that. There's, let me grab my deck. That is pretty much this.
This deck would kill for a portable hole, wouldn't it?
It would, yeah. Let me.
If we're mono white, we have Idyllic Grange.
Oh, Idyllic Grange.
We can play Eagles of the North, which is it's okay.
It's
not the worst.
It's definitely the worst of all of the cycle for sure.
It is.
Tragically so.
If we need creatures, we have Militia Bugler, which can do some cool stuff. This is Recommission. This is a card I have in mind.
Oh, Recommission could be sweet with the Recommission maybe
discarding
on like Rafine's Informant. I mean, what we can see here though is that there's a very real like mono white deck. This is 56 cards. And it kind of looks like it wants 4 more pieces of removal. I'm not really sure what we would want. Diego mentions
Sunlance exists.
Yeah, and Sunlance. Yeah, that's a tragic card if I've ever seen one. Let's see here.
For the Boros version of this deck, is it too far to suggest Galvanic Blast and some Artifact lands?
This is the new card.
That's Ooh, yeah.
Yeah, this is kind of like exactly what the deck wants, right? Like a
Yeah.
3/3.
Yep.
Yeah, that's a great
Yeah, that
recommendation, Diego. Yep. And I don't
definitely
know
has
why
some potential.
my YouTube chat isn't coming up here.
I just dropped my cards.
Let's see. I wonder if I'm just not. Oh, it's just because it's below. Ah, there we go. Thank you, Diego. Scoot that down a little bit here. Yeah, so you can see that there's some cool stuff to do with the new Thraben Inspector here. The Soul Sisters decks as well will probably want those. The Soul Sisters decks are actually quite similar to this, but the main thing is that like they're just a little bit different. They're not playing the Boros Elite, for example, which would be in the next set coming along, but they're not playing Strands. They're mainly on the Battle Screech type stuff. So yeah.
Yep. And,
Now, yeah.
Celestial Unicorn used to be.
Oh yeah.
That was a big boogeyman for a little while.
Yeah.
If we're in mono white, what about Judge's Familiar?
Oh.
Which is
Whoa.
Familiar, also an excellent downshift.
Yeah. So wait, Judge's Familiar seems like that could easily be in Boros, right?
Yeah.
Boros or mono white, yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So like
that's a great call.
In this deck here, if these are flex slots, right? Cut the 2 rallies, and maybe the Electrickery, and maybe 1 Lunarch Veteran, and get 4 Judge's Familiars in there.
Yeah.
And Judge's Familiar strikes me as a card that he could even replace Squadron Hawk. It's kind of different because Squadron Hawk is giving you more birds, right? It's like a threat dense card. You're just getting a whole bunch of birds. But ultimately, these birds are 2 mana 1/1 flyers. They're not terribly good. And something like Judge's Familiar just being like this onboard piece of disruption seems like it could be really strong. In fact, was there any place in any of these lists that we were looking at where Judge's Familiar, well, because it's not an ETB, so we're not really reusing it there. It's mainly these places, these like tempo or mid-range decks here.
I think we're not aggressive enough to really capitalize on the mana denial that it effectively does.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Now, Diego also mentions some number of recommission / return triumphant doesn't seem bad either. Certainly alongside like the Rafine's Informant, it's pretty good. Any sort of flyer, the return triumphant's pretty sick because you actually continue to get bigger and bigger every time you attack. The recommission immediately gives it to you though. So that's something to consider there as well. But yeah, you could totally see this being a Gates deck as well. I really like the Novice Inspector and the Thraben Inspectors in the Gates context because then you're taking this like 1/2 that sucks in the late game, and we're saying, well, and it's funny, it sucks in the late game, but it's also like I'm never sad to see a Thraben Inspector because it's a 3 mana draw card, right, on a body.
Absolutely.
And then the Gates are saying, well, it doesn't matter how big you are. It's kind of like, it reminds me a bit of Rilsa Rail and cPDH, where you're like, if I'm playing initiative, why do my creatures need to be big and expensive? In fact, they want to be small because I'm going to make them big with Forge. I'm going to make them big with Throne. And that's kind of what we have here too. We have like these Gates that are guaranteeing that these things eventually are just going to become big threats, which is pretty darn cool. So yeah, the Novice Inspector definitely seems to have some play there. I wonder if Novice Inspector will also see play in all the Glitters decks in the Azorius Affinity stuff.
I remember somebody was talking about a mono white Glitters deck. I don't remember who that was.
Oh, mono white Glitters. Yeah.
I don't know if it's got a whole lot on.
I mean,
the white blue Glitters deck, but
white blue Glitters draws a lot of cards.
It does, yeah.
It does.
Yeah, draws a lot of cards. Because you'd be losing Of One Mind and Thoughtcast. Oh my god.
And Moon Circuit Hacker.
And Moon Circuit Hacker, which happens to be an enchantment for the fact that it's an enchantment for all the glitters is just like so obnoxious that's just like a thing. So yeah, this is definitely cool. Now there were a couple of other lists that we didn't get to in here as well. And this was one of them that I wanted to highlight. And Kylosaur, you had brought this one up by a pretty prolific Pauper grinder as well, which is Shackles backwards.
Yes, Shackles backwards. Yep.
Shackles backwards. All right. Well, shout out to you, Shackles, because you're a cleansing wildfire, Chad, and I love that. This is maybe you can tell me a little bit about what you see in this list here over some of the other things that we've done. This is back to Mardu, and this is a synth deck, but it's a bit of a different flavor of synth.
Yeah, one of the things that as a wildfire gets you is extra resources to make the synthesizers even more insane. As you're using the cleansing wildfire, yeah, as you'll note, the deck tops out at 2.
Yeah,
So there's nothing more expensive than 2 in the deck, but you have so many ways to pick up and rebuy the synthesizers that you still want a lot of resources.
yeah,
And that's where the cleansing wildfire comes in. Also, I mean, there's also other reasons to play wildfire, like somebody plays a bounce land or a basilisk gate,
yeah.
you can snipe it.
Yeah. It's like a main deck hate against like a number of different things.
Yeah, Ponza loads up.
God,
on
obliterates Ponza.
Yeah. But anyways, yeah, the main idea though is that you get more resources to do more and more insane things with your experimental synthesizers, draw more cards with your Lembas and your Ichor Wellspring,
dude,
things like that.
Cleansing Wildfire, like flipped off of experimental synthesizer is so gross, actually. That is so much card advantage. Now let's talk about what the cost of that is. One of the key differences that we're seeing here is that they're actually going even deeper on artifacts, and they're going into Ichor Wellspring because they really want to leverage Krark-Clan Shaman. So Krark-Clan Shaman, Ichor Wellspring, and Synth, that's like a really sick pairing. But what they're also getting, what they're not getting is they're not getting bolts, and they're not getting blasts. Or they have blast and cast down. Sorry, cast down, blast, and Tithing Blade is their main removal. So this deck has 2. So in a way, the Krark-Clan Shamans are kind of like occupying the bolt slots that we have in our list. Also on Omen of the Dead, also on Makeshift Munitions. This is a very cool list. I would love to try this one out side by side alongside the one that we built. But Cleansing Wildfire, one of the things I really like about this too is that Cleansing Wildfire, like this deck, doesn't need to ramp because it doesn't have expensive spells. But this deck definitely appreciates being able to increase its action economy. This is a mana-hungry archetype. Like, you just want to have lands. You want to hit your land drops every single turn because what you want to do is loop cards over and over and over again. You get to this point of the game where you're like, draw Skyfisher, play a Tithing Blade, pick the Tithing Blade up, play it again, just this kind of nonsense. It's like Cleansing Wildfire actually fits really well into that, doesn't it? And it's not playing Thraben Inspector, so the Krark-Clan Shaman has no downside for us. Because that's one of the things they lose. Like, basically, Cleansing Wildfire is Thraben Inspector in this deck. Right? Or Ichor Wellspring, right? This deck draws like a dumb number of cards. Like, every card in this deck outside of Galvanic Blast, Cast Down, it's Galvanic Blast, Cast Down, and Tithing Blade don't draw cards. Everything else does, essentially, right?
But they
basically
generally go even on cards.
Right. Yeah.
But the churn through the deck is
serious. Serious.
Very,
This is cool. Yeah, I like this one. And then the last one, I think that was the last one we were going to look at there. So let me switch us over to. Oh, we've got Alex. What's up? Hey, it's my boyfriend. How is it going, beautiful? Good to see you, Alex. Glad to have you in the chat, bud. Yeah. It's been a long time. It's weird to be to spend the last year so consistently producing content and then take like 2 weeks off, and it was very strange, very strange. So regardless, though, I think this is probably a great place for us to wrap up here, unless you guys have any things you guys want to highlight. But the main goal of this isn't to be prescriptive, right? Like we have some great ideas about, and let's get back over to Moxfield here. we have some great ideas about the different things you can do in Orzhov. And now the title, maybe you're thinking, oh, this is a little bit of a bait and switch because we talked about red too. Well, the thing that got us going down this path was Orzhov. And this is kind of what we've got here. And this is really kind of the leaping off point for everything that we did here. There's clearly a lot of different ways to do this. If you want to be going bigger into Ephemerate, if you want to go bigger into Pestilence, if you want to be playing Initiative and Monarch game, even this deck here, you could totally see like cutting Aviary Mechanic for like a single Goliath Paladin to start the Initiative up. But basically this building around Glint Hawk, Core Skyfisher, Thraben Inspector, these ETB artifacts and enchantments and stuff, this is a very lively and interesting place to be in Pauper right now. And that's really what I wanted to highlight with my friends Ankylosaur and Ravamati here today, is that whatever you want to do in these colors, there's something for you. Whether it's, sacking the Ichor Wellsprings, or like pumping up a Krark Clan Shaman with your gate package, and then sacking Ichor Wellsprings and Synth to draw cards to like wipe your opponent's board, or whether it's looping Hopeless Nightmare and Tithing Blade in sort of this like Orzhov shell, which clearly benefits from only being 2-color because you do get the snuff out, which is quite good, and you get to lean harder into this kind of a thing, or whether you want to be doing something like with the Mardu Synth. Let's see if I can find the other one here, or Mardu Blade, as we're calling it, where where you're going into that 3-color territory and really reaping the benefits of all the different colors. And actually, one of the things I love is that we're on so many less tap lands than everybody else seems to be on. I know, like I was venting to you guys that the deck that I took to my last Rags to Riches was Andre Mengucci's Boros synthesizer deck, and good lord, did it feel clunky. The number of tap lands and the Basilica, not the Basilica, but the Garrison, paired with all the gain lands and the colorless lands, and it was just like sometimes my deck just didn't function. This deck here, very high chance that you're going to have your colors online and that you're going to like play on curve some portion of the time. Still 9 tap lands, but so yeah, this is kind of the goal today, was to just kind of expand on this and to get excited about Pauper again. I know, Ankylosaur, you've been kind of taking a break from cPDH and looking into Pauper. We were kind of on the same page there, just focusing on going back to the roots. That's where I started when it came to this, and spent a solid 6 years playing Pauper before I ever found cPDH. So yeah. A lot of cool stuff here. Although looking at these lists, man, that Cleansing Wildfire deck is really starting to like, ooh, as before we started the show, actually, I was telling you guys, and I'll share this with you all, chat, that one of my favorite deck of all time in Pauper was a Moist Jund deck, and it was a Cleansing Wildfire deck. With the artifact lands, and it was 4 colors, and it was Brainstorms, Mole Drifters. This was when Initiative was legal, but nobody really knew about it. Nobody really cared. Nobody just like most people just kind of slid right off of their brains. And so it had 4 Aarakocra Sneak. It had 4 Vicious Battle Rager. It had boarding parties and the Annoyed Altasaur in it, and it just. You can think about some of the stupid stuff like Brainstorm and Cleansing Wildfire together, of course, are just like peas and carrots. You love to see that. It's like put your 2 worst cards back on top, shuffle them away with the Cleansing Wildfire while ramping, and then of course cascading with the Brainstorm also allows you to set up your Cascades, and then also Throne of the Dead 3 allows you to set up your Throne of the Dead 3 hits, which is also really gross. So that was like my favorite time in Pauper ever, and then they brutally murdered my boy. look how they massacred my boy. They took away my toys. They took them away. So, but yeah. Cool. Well, this has been really fun, guys, and it's been an amazing correspondence, kind of going back and forth between this, seeing you guys testing, coming up with different builds, and exploring the space. It's very clear that there's some exciting things happening here. So I want to thank you guys for sharing your time and your insights as we've gone through this stuff.
Absolutely. Thanks for having us on.
Yeah,
ton of fun.
as always. And of course, for those of you who perhaps haven't seen their content before, if you want to see more from Ankylosaur has a YouTube channel. And I'm going to type it in the chat below. Ankylosaur. It's so funny. I used to be obsessed with dinosaurs when I was a kid, and I would have been able to spell that with no mistakes before. But I've been misspelling your name for some time. So Ankylosaur, and then what's the tag at the end? It's
MTG.
YouTube. MTG? Okay, so you do youtube.com/Ankylosaur MTG. Ankylosaur's got some amazing videos talking about meta breakdowns, talking about different decks. He's got a budget decks video and some deck techs and stuff like that as well. So make sure to go check him out, support that cPDH content, and subscribe to his stuff. And yeah, now I'm going to transition views here a little bit. And talk with you all directly. Thank you all so much for being here today. Alex saw a really interesting red turbo initiative monarch deck. Oh boy, Alex, you should talk with talk with Ankylosaur about turbo initiative because he
we were playing that a little.
Some spicy, some real spicy bullshit.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, so make sure to go check that out. But yeah, you should talk with him about that. Thank you everybody for showing up today. It was great to see you. Sorry for the wait in between, just moving. Moving is such a long process, and of course I was going to stream last week, and then but it just became too difficult to do that. Moving, it's a lot of work. So thanks for your patience. We're running up on the end of the year here, so I hope everybody's having a great time with their family and their loved ones. If you do want to support the content and join the Patreon, you can go to patreon.com/common connoisseurs, where you've got tiers from $2, $5, $10, $20, and $50 a month for those of you interested in getting a little more value out of the streams, supporting the content, whatever it is you wish to do. And speaking of which, I want to celebrate and thank one of our newest members, okay? And I want to make sure I get the spelling of the name here right. Yep. And we have a new let's see, we got to go back to here. Yeah, this is what I get for making an overly complicated interface. We have our newest patron and our largest patron, and that is Brennan Lewin. Brennan, I want to thank you so much for your contributions to the channel as a massive donation. And if you all want to join Brennan and get access to the supporters only section of the Discord, see all the updates that I make on all of my cPDH decks posted there. It's the only place where you're going to get that. That's a great place to do it. So in the link to the description below, you can see the link to get there where you can support it really all the different levels. So thank you, Brennan. Much appreciated. And to you all out there, hope you're having a great rest of your day. And wherever you are in the multiverse, we'll catch you on the battlefield. Peace out, friends.